afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Kelly. I'm founder of an organisation called GIY, which stands for Grow It Yourself. And I'm going to be covering the session on when is the right time to start, which is just as well, because I think that's the only part that I can confidently say I've mastered at this stage. The bulb of garlic, incidentally, that was referred to is mine. I'll be coming back to that in a second. I suppose I've made two big leaps into the unknown in terms of starting something brand new in my life. The first being I worked in the IT industry for 10 years. Straight out of college, went into work for an Irish company called Mentech. Spent 10 years selling IT solutions. And then left at the time what was a six-figure salary to go and work as a journalist. And my first paycheck as a journalist was €75 for an article that I wrote for the Irish Times magazine, which I was very proud of. About 3 or 4 years later, I left a relatively successful career as a freelance journalist and took the leap into becoming a social entrepreneur, which is really what I'm here to talk about today. So I suppose two very different leaps, one leaving a long-term job, very well paid, which I hated, and the second time around it was leaving a very poorly paid job, which I loved. Each, I suppose, had its own challenges. My kind of road to Damascus moment happened in the supermarket in Waterford about 6 years ago at this stage, and it came courtesy of one of these, a bulb of garlic, which I was about to throw into the supermarket trolley, pretty casually, and noticed that on the label it said "product of China," which is I think because it was China and not Spain or Italy, because it was something so small and so cheap that it travelled so far, it really caught my imagination. I couldn't understand why we would want to import something 10,000 miles across the globe that we can grow perfectly well ourselves. I suppose I didn't know it at the time, but garlic actually is a great, Chinese garlic is a great metaphor for some of the problems we have in our food chain. So in this country, we produce enough food every single year to feed about 34 million people. Last year we exported €9 billion worth of food from Ireland, but at the same time we imported €5 billion. And €3 billion of that is food we can grow or rear ourselves here in Ireland. And this is the kicker. There's particular types of food where we actually import exactly the same amount as we export. So there's foods passing each other in the Irish Sea, container ships, some bringing food in, some sending food out. And that's what our food chain is about now. It's about, trade as opposed to being about self-sufficiency or feeding ourselves as a nation. We've seen this week with the horse meat scandal. Tesco's yesterday came out and talked about, this particular supplier that was doing its own brand spaghetti bolognese. 5 different suppliers in 5 different European countries were involved in sourcing the meat from them. So the complexity that we have in our food chain, I suppose, is what I was reacting to that day in the supermarket. And my solution was, hands up, anyone in the room ever grown garlic? Anybody? Maybe 5%, 10% of people in the room. Very simple thing to grow. You take an individual clove from that bulb, stick it in the ground, and over about 6 months it becomes a bulb. So really, really easy thing to grow. Just as well I sort of started on garlic, I think. So having had that success with garlic, I then came across very quickly my inadequacies as a grower. And I decided that the best way to get skills and find out more about it was to network with other growers. So I set up what I called a GIY group in Waterford, which is my hometown, and 100 people showed up the first night at the GIY meeting in Waterford in 2008. And very quickly the idea of it spread. I was still working as a journalist at the time, but the idea sort of was very open source, very viral, and it spread very quickly around the southeast of Ireland. And with the support of Social Entrepreneurs Ireland, it gradually turned from being a hobby, I suppose, for me into being a full-time job. and having to make another big leap into the unknown. So people grow their own food, I suppose, for all sorts of different reasons. They can be motivated by health or the environment, or they just want to get out and get more exercise, whatever the case may be. But for every single one of those people, they see it as almost a revolutionary kind of an act. It gives them a sense of empowerment and taking back control of the food chain. So from that point in 2008, where it was a very personal, local, solution to my own lack of skills, it became a social enterprise, which is now, there's about 35,000 people involved in the movement around Ireland. We have 100 GIY groups. We're in every single county. On average, somewhere in Ireland every single day, there's about 3 GIY groups meet somewhere around the country, which is fantastic. And we've tried to become a social enterprise as opposed to a charity. So in other words, the people that we employ, and we employ about 6 people to help us achieve the aim of helping people to grow their own food. The way we fund that work, or certainly where we're trying to get to, is that would be an earned income. So in other words, we're selling people products and services that they need to grow their own, and the profits we generate from that retail activity get ploughed back into helping us achieve our mission. So I suppose just that's a picture of me in my older corporate days. I'm less corporate now, as you can see. I just open neck shirt kind of vibe that I've got going on now. But back then it was all about shirt and tie and frustrated farmer feeding my pigs before I went to work in the morning. So the idea of when the question of when is the right time to make that leap is something that exercised my mind a lot. The first thing I think it's important to say is that in each of those 2 occasions when I took that leap, first of all from the corporate world into becoming a journalist, and secondly from becoming a journalist to a social entrepreneur, I was pretty sure that there was a demand for the product and services that I was offering to people before I took that leap. So I suppose my point would be, make sure that you've done a pretty realistic assessment of whether there is a demand out there for the product or service you're trying to sell, and make sure you've tested that and have evidence for that. When we approached Social Entrepreneurs Ireland first for a grant, I think we had 20 GIY groups around the southeast of Ireland, so we knew that there was a demand there. When I left the IT world, I got some articles published, albeit on a very low income, but I knew that I could write this stuff and I knew I could get it published, which is very important, I think. Secondly, ask yourself honestly, can you pay your bills? For me, I was in my 30s. I had a mortgage. I have kids now, I suppose, as well. So it's a case of being practical about this. And I was actually, although some people have said, God, you were, that was really brave, a brave leap you met. In actual fact, I was actually quite conservative about it, and I kept, in both cases, I was sort of doing it as a hobby, and I only made that leap and decision to go for it full time when I was pretty sure that the income was there to cover myself. So just be sure that from a practical perspective, you can pull it off. Thirdly, I think really importantly, to honestly ask yourself the question, do you have what it takes to pull it off, to become an entrepreneur or a social entrepreneur? Do you have the skills? I was lucky in a sense that the skills that I gained as a salesman in the IT world, really stood to me over time. I'd never run an organization or been a manager or ran a company, but I did know how to sell an idea. I knew how to get into a room and pitch to a potential sponsor, for example, and that was really important. That all of those, skills came to help me, I suppose, at that stage. And if you do an honest assessment of the skills that you have and you decide, I don't have all the skills I need to pull this off, then you need to find those skills either within yourself in terms of training or hook up with somebody else that can plug the gaps. I'm a kind of a bit of a dreamer, not very good from the day-to-day practical stuff, and I really early on with GIY, I latched on to a guy who had all the skills that I was missing. So, really methodical, really practical kind of a guy who was able to be the sort of yin to my yang, which is really, really important. So plug the gaps in skills if you have to. Fourth point I would say is ask yourself, in terms of whether it's the right time to start, ask yourself, do you have a support network? I think every entrepreneur, business or social, that you speak to will talk about the loneliness that can be there at the heart of that process. Even though you can be surrounded by people, it's still, you're the guy or girl at the top of the room, the buck stops with you, and that can be a pretty lonely experience. So it's really, really important to surround yourself with some sort of a support network. I think we're all, very lucky as social entrepreneurs. We've got an organisation like SEI that we can plug into, and I always feel, events in that they run, it's like sort of plugging into the mothership again or something. So that's really important. And the equivalent in the business world, I guess, go looking for people that have started businesses, that have started initiatives, and talk to them. Go into your enterprise board or chamber of commerce or whatever the case may be, and make sure you surround yourself with people that are going to be supportive and understand the challenges that you have. Very importantly, I would ask yourself seriously the question about whether you're willing to dedicate your life to it. And I presume this is the same in business or social, but certainly I don't think I had any comprehension at the start how much GIY was going to take over my life. And I think it's 3 o'clock in the morning sitting at your computer. It's the merging of your work and life. It's the sort of blurring of the lines between a job and a hobby and turning it into a kind of a jobby that you need to be sort of prepared for, and the impact that that's going to have on your life and your health and all of that very important stuff. So I think that's an important point to consider at the start, that realistically starting a business or a social enterprise, it's going to be getting it up off the ground. It's going to be a 3-4 year time investment, and pretty full on excuse me, for that period. And finally, just to say, to ask yourself that question. It's a very subjective thing about the tipping point, but I felt with GIY it reached a tipping point at the point at which I leapt off and took it on full time. There was just that sense in the air that the time was right. And that kind of comes to my last point, which is to ask yourself what your gut says about it, because you can ask yourself all the questions and probe your mind or ask your head what it thinks, but really I think you've got to listen to what your gut has to say on the issue, and ultimately, albeit your gut's probably going to say, actually, I'm terrified beyond belief, I feel sick to my core about even trying this. And I think if it says that, you're probably on the right track somewhere, actually. So I would finish by saying, with one piece of advice which someone gave me about 5 years ago, which has sort of stuck with me ever since, and it's to say, do not die with your music still in you. Thanks very much.